Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 300 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Are you ready to discover what your Knack for Business truly is? Your hosts are Bernie Fransgrote from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc.
Today's topic is podcast ROI strategies every small business needs. A question for the audience: how can you create a podcast that not only engages your audience, but also drives real business results and aligns with your goals? That's what our guest is about today. Our guest is Megan Dougherty from One Stone Creative. Megan is a digital marketing strategist with a background in online business development. She has had the opportunity to work with hundreds of business owners in a huge variety of industries. In 2017, she co-founded One Stone Creative, a podcast production agency specializing in white label podcast production and network development. In 2020, One Stone Creative developed the business podcast blueprints to help companies and executives dial into their specific ways they can leverage a podcast for their content marketing and business development goals. Megan is also the creator of the State of Business Podcasting Report, the Podcasting for Business Conference, and the author of Podcasting for Business: How to Create a Show That Makes a Bottom Line Difference for Your Company. She currently lives in Western Quebec with her spouse, Nog the cat, 5 chickens, and 65 thriving houseplants. Megan, so glad to have you here. And
Thank you so much.
What is your favorite quote or saying?
Mine is that's from a Robert Service poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. One line of it is, "A promise made is a debt unpaid." That has always stuck with me as such an important thing to consider as a business owner, as a person. One of my greatest values as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, is when we say we're going to do something to the greatest extent possible, we make sure that we do it. That's one of the underpinnings of how we do business, how I run my company, and how I try to be as a person.
And what's your tagline for your business?
At the moment, it is relentlessly practical podcasting for your business. But as an entrepreneur, these things are always evolving. My current business coach and I are deciding if that is also the way forward for the future.
It's the way forward. I like it.
Thank you.
So this is a unique niche to get into. What brought you into the podcast space?
It wasn't the traditional way in. I didn't set out as a child to say, I'm going to get into media, I'm going to make content, I'm going to produce podcasts. It was 2017 when I started the company. I was in between projects at the moment, and an old colleague from a company I used to work at, she reached out of the blue one day and she says, "Hey, do you want to start a business together?" And I said, okay. Her background was in broadcast audio. She was a veteran of radio. She was a sound engineer, on-air talent. My background was in digital business development. So we put those two things together and we're like, okay, we're going to produce podcasts for business. We started shaking the network tree a little bit. We got our first couple of podcast production clients, and we've been doing it ever since.
So that journey of digital marketing and business development led to the founding of the One Stone Creative. But you also have the podcast blueprints. What's that all about,
Yes.
the business podcast blueprints?
Over the first few years that we were producing podcasts, we were using a lot of kind of, I guess, call it traditional digital marketing theory to help make podcasts that were revenue positive in business, or at least had a good ROI. As we started working with more and more different shows and different businesses, we were able to start kind of codifying the things that worked and the things that we could expect to work in different situations. And so we coalesced these into the Business Podcast Blueprints, which is a model that has 5 podcast archetypes that a business owner can use to design a show that's impactful for their business. And within each of those high-level archetypes, there are individual metrics that you can optimize a show for specific business outcomes that you need. And so we call the model the Business Podcast Blueprints. It's a manual for creating a profitable podcast.
Oh, very nice. What does it go for? What's the price point?
Right now, it's available either when you are producing a podcast with us, or you can get a copy of my book, Podcasting for Business: How to Create a Show That Makes a Bottom Line Difference in Your Company. It's got the whole model outlined and then 15 individual business outcomes and step-by-step instructions on how to optimize a show for them. The hard copy is about $20 and the ebook is $10.
And that's Amazon or your website?
You can go to podcastingforbusiness.com/book and you'll find it right there.
So what differentiates One Stone Creative's podcast production from other people in the industry? There's got to be more people. How does someone find you? How does someone know, yeah, that's a ticket, that's the one to go with versus another?
Definitely. A lot of our business over the years has been referral grown, which I take as a very big compliment. So most of our current clients are people who we have worked with and they have introduced us to someone else. I've also got a LinkedIn newsletter, which is really fun. We send that out every week with few exceptions, and people get to know us and our theories there. But in terms of differentiators, I would say it's a really hardline focus on what is going to make this a profitable project for the business. Because a lot of producers in the agency, and they're amazing. The podcasting community is big, it's generous, it's kind. But most of the producers and experts and influencers working the show are really focused on the first of two of the three types of podcasts. First is our passion projects that you do because you love it and it's a hobby. Second are podcasts designed to be businesses in and of themselves, to hopefully grow big, get a big audience, monetize through sponsorship, become its own big entity. And then there's the third
That's-
This one is yours, and it's a great way to go. And then the third podcast is, let's say you have another business. You're in law, you're in finance, you're in marketing, consultant, and you want a podcast as a marketing channel for your business. That's got different needs than a podcast that is for passion or one that is a business in and of itself. And so we've really strictly focused on podcasts that are leveraged within existing businesses. That's probably the biggest differentiator between us and a lot of the other podcast production agencies out there. Although we're not the only ones who do it. I think we do it very well.
Megan, I talk to people in podcasting, colleagues and competitors, and most of them came through the passion model. I don't want to talk to somebody about the train set. I want to make money.
I'm with you.
Tell me more, unpack those expectations.
People come into podcasting exactly as you say. They look at the biggest shows, the shows that are the most popular, the shows that are the most well-known, and they think, okay, so what a podcast means is that it's going to be a couple of people sitting having a conversation. There's going to be ads. There's going to be sponsors. These days, it's going to be on YouTube. And you're going to make your money from these like super awesome sponsorship deals. But there are so many different ways to leverage podcasting when you stop looking at it as a thing that exists with its own objective criteria for success or failure and start looking at it as a tool that you can design and customize to do specific things for you. Some of the things that we see as really popular ways to leverage a podcast will be as a relationship building tool. So you've got a podcast and its only real reason for existing is to open the calendars of the people that you want to network with. And so then you meet potential clients, referral partners, colleagues, or promoters. That's the business benefit of your podcast. Another one might be if you've got a big audience of people who love your books, they love to attend your events when you speak. This is a way to keep them engaged and to keep you top of mind in between big events and big releases. You can engage people at scale. There's no limit to the ways you can leverage a podcast. In the book, we outlined 15 of them. But I think the most important thing when it comes to leveraging a podcast is you've got to be able to measure the impact it's making on your business. For me, the biggest and most important thing is being able to attribute real value to what your show is generating for your business. It's really just a hobby.
That speaks to metrics. So what are the metrics you're looking for other than ka-ching?
That's going to depend very much on the business. Downloads are, of course, the most talked about, the most common, the most popular metric in podcasting because they are by and large the easiest to get. And it's good to know what they are, and it's good to know what the rate of growth or the rate of change of your downloads is over time. But as a business owner, if you're trying to leverage a show to improve your business in different areas, downloads tell you basically nothing about what is happening in your business. For downloads to matter to a business podcast, they have to be in a direct line to something else like income or like conversions or like engagement touch points. And so when you get a little more granular about what actually is value to my business, that's when you start to get into the fun of being able to track how different episodes, different topics, different promotional activities, different guests make an impact on things like emails I was sent or discovery calls I had. If you're trying to grow your show as a business, downloads are going to be very critical because that's going to be the number by which you get those sponsorships. It's going to be the number by which you're able to attract those good sponsors. That's a direct line to value. And so, of course, downloads are important in that case. But let's say my own podcast, it's mostly a relationship building show. And it's a content show where I'm trying to get our IP out there in a way to build our authority. Downloads do not really make a bottom line difference to me. I don't even look at them. I don't track them because they're not relevant. What I track is relationships. I track referrals. I track follow-ups because those are the metrics that are meaningful to me. So in terms of what metrics matter, that depends on your business. It might be your sales cycle length. It might be the new products that you create from your show. It might be the relationships, possibly downloads or sponsorship dollars. But it's got to have a line to a business outcome that at some point is going to be on a P&L statement for a business owner for it to be worth measuring.
How do you integrate that? We've touched on the metrics. So downloads, now you're looking for other traction points. So emails. How do you attribute podcast release? And then over here, you go email chatter, visits the website. How do you correlate the two? How do you attribute one to the other? And then what means do you use to make that happen?
Lots and lots of hard work.
That wasn't the easy answer.
No, to be more clear, it's often imperfect. And I'll preface everything with that. But let's say we want to track, I'll use the website traffic example. You want to set up your Google Analytics clearly to be able to see who makes the jump from visiting a podcast episode page on your website to booking a call page, or even have a specific book a call link that you can track on each individual page. So you can see, okay, someone was on this page listening to this episode, then they clicked a link to book a call with me. That's an indicator that this episode did something for them. And you're probably never going to capture perfect data because podcasting is fuzzy, and you'll never know if somebody was listening to an episode at the gym and then remembered your URL and typed it in. But when you add some systems around the metrics that are the most important, you can get pretty good visibility on how things are working in most cases.
So that would mean then your CRM's integrated with your website and everything functions as a unit. So you're just taking a graph going, I'm having a peak here, podcast released here, allow for maybe a 5-day lag for everybody to start drinking the Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid's consumed. Now they have a sugar high. It sounds
That
like
could be one way of doing it for sure. And if we're tracking like specifically a number of calls generated by episodes, I would go on a link basis and track it over time. Because I don't care if someone did it within the first 5 days of release. If they do it 6 months down the line, that's awesome. I still want to know. Because maybe something happens in the news that makes that topic particularly relevant. So someone does a search, they find your episode. Okay, excellent. Over the course of a year, for example, you'll say, wow, all of my podcast episodes about widgets got more calls than the episodes that I did about whatsits. So next year, I better have some more calls about widgets or some more conversations about widgets to encourage more of that behavior.
I have a left brain, right brain question.
Sure.
As a podcaster, you want to put out content that is engaging, that is entertaining, people want to listen to. But as a podcast owner and creator, you should have business goals that you've actually thought about. How do you keep between those two ditches?
Within my business and the shows that I work with and produce, the business goals come first. And it's not that the audience doesn't matter. It's not that the content shouldn't be good. The editing should be high quality. That's respect for the people who are listening and the guests that you have, very importantly. But the business goal does come first as a business owner, because you're not going to all the trouble of building an empire for your health. Everything that you do as a marketing channel for your business or as a business development tool for your business, it's got to pull its weight in your company. And when it comes down to engaging others, hopefully you've got an audience that is aligned enough with your business that the things you're going to talk about will naturally be interesting. You want to create content that serves them. If your most important goal, for example, is building relationships with the people you have as guests, they're your audience, not necessarily strangers who might find you someday. It's showing that guest a really good time because they are the key audience for the podcast. Or maybe if you've got, I know some podcasts, they're internal podcasts, they're about creating company culture to get the CEO into the ears of frontline employees. The employees are the audience. They're also captive. The CEO can really just talk about what he wants to, because that's the goal of the podcast, making sure that his message is getting down to his bottom line employees. So it's maybe a little bit of a mercenary way to look at it, but that's capitalism.
Some people might have I have a radio voice, and that might be a kind of, no, you don't. Misconceptions. What misconceptions are wrapped around podcasting? What do people that you found from your own experience are going, I've just burst your bubble?
A big one is that downloads are the most important thing you can track. People think that they need to have a certain amount of growth or attain a certain level of size of audience to be valid as a podcaster. That's not true. And to your point about the voice, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of women, are concerned about their voice and how they are sounding. And I interviewed a vocal coach once, and she said something beautiful. Your voice is perfect, full stop. You can work on your voice to have more power, more control, more variety, but your voice is your voice. It's like your signature. I think everyone's voice should be appreciated for what it is. Other misconceptions about podcasting is really that a podcast has to be a certain way, that you have to have guests, or that it has to release every week, or that it has to release forever. You're the boss of your podcast. You get to decide, okay, I'm going to do a season. It's going to be 12 episodes, and that's all the podcasting I'm ever going to do. Amazing. You're a valid podcaster. Or you might decide, I'm going to release every other week, and they're going to be half solo episodes and half guests. Amazing. You're a valid podcaster. It's a tool that you get to do whatever you want with. And I think that's something that excites me about the medium.
You're preaching heresy to some people in your industry.
I'm completely comfortable with that. It may be legitimate heresy for a podcast that does have like an audience building or growth focus that is meant to be a business. But for a business podcast, it's the same as your email marketing strategy. You can do what you want. It's the same as how you manage your employees. You can do it as you like and how it works for you and your business.
I like the part where you're indicating it can be a solo or just back and forth, but I don't think Wayne and I could go back and forth. We're at already 250 plus podcasts, and that'll be a long dialogue. We like guests because that's part of the nature of what we do. I think it's fascinating. So podcast length, that might be the other caveat in what is a proper length? How do you determine the right length for a podcast based on the topic?
I guess it would be the same way that you measure the correct length of rope.
Love it. Depends how far you want to go with it.
Yeah.
If I'm ever falling off the side of a cliff, I want it pretty long.
Exactly. So if you want to do a podcast episode about the War of the Roses, you're going to want to make that a pretty long and beefy episode, or maybe even have a whole bunch of episodes about it. If you're talking about the best way to update your email signature in Google, that's not going to have to be a very long email. So I tend to recommend, as best practice for newer podcasters, you want to be able to thoroughly explore one topic. Usually that can be done in about 30 minutes, but that really can vary a lot. For newer podcasters, I recommend putting a cap on your interviews, because when you're newer, you don't get to the point very quickly. You ramble, you go back and forth. It's easier to get to the juicy stuff fast with a shorter show because you've got that little bit of time pressure. But they're really not hard and fast rules. Like, I know really popular shows that are 10 minutes each and release once a week. Me personally, for listening, give me a good hour and a half long podcast discussing something juicy. That's what I'm going to want to listen to. People are different. Audiences are different. Businesses are different. You got to do what works and what fits in your schedule. I wish I had the time to record 2-hour-long podcast episodes, but sadly, my schedule does not permit it.
Everyone speaks in generalities. There's some people who believe if you own an iPod, you can podcast. What is a real podcast in your, to use that word real, what does a real podcast cost to look like?
It can really vary, and it's changing very fast. I think there are people who are producing very good podcasts with iPhones. It captures surprisingly good audio. In a professional context, I'd like to see someone with professional grade mic. And that can be $150, $200. Shure just came out with a new one designed for podcasters. It's very cool. That's really going to make you sound as good as possible. I tend to recommend also for business professional podcasts using a dedicated podcast platform. Something like Riverside or Squadcast is going to capture more of the sound than VoIP systems will. And I'm a little biased on this one, so take it for what it will. I do believe in professional editing and having...
Why?
Perhaps that could be industry bias on my part. There are a lot of people who do it in-house and do a great job. It's like a lot of things in business, right? You can spend as much money as you want on a fancy mic and a great sound booth. But I think if you get a good mic and learn how to use it well, that's going to get you 80% of the way there in terms of costing to make a real podcast. So that's where I would focus. If you want to change one thing, upgrade your mic.
What do you use for production, for editing? I know what I use, but what do you use?
We use the Adobe suite right now for editing. So our production team, they use Adobe for editing. And we like that because we can have individual templates with settings for the different shows that we edit, because different voices need different treatments on the back end. And I'm not the sound engineer at the company, so I'm communicating what my business partner, the sound engineer, has said we are doing. And that, as a production company, we want to be doing things at that level. It doesn't mean that every podcast needs that to be successful.
So would you also say there's the audio component? And we've already talked about it, and just prior to the launch, they're recording the podcast. We're using certain video elements and capitalizing on that for marketing purposes. I posted it, I put it on a platform, out it goes. But there's more than that. You got to have some sort of flash or jingle for people to look at. How do you generate that artwork? How do you craft that? Do you source it through AI? Do you source it through the company, the person's face? Do you put animation in there? How do you set that up?
Well, because we're talking right now, it's the audio-visual brand of your podcast, and that contains all of the elements that we're talking about. So it's got your intro music. If you've got a video channel, your video bumper, that's the bit with the music and maybe the animations. And then part of your audio-visual brand is your editing. There's a difference between Descript editing and a human editing, and there's going to be different quality levels that come out because of the nature of the different systems. Sourcing your music. There's lots of cool free libraries with royalty-free music. Some people have their friend's band record them a custom jingle. I think that's awesome. For us, we've got an in-house designer who does the art and the graphics and creates the templates that are reused for each episode. The completely AI ones still look weird. I'm not completely on board with them yet, but that's changing every day. As a business owner, you want your podcast to look like it belongs to the rest of your brand. So it should have similar colors. You should have similar fonts. In terms of cover art, our research shows that cover art is more common than anything else in a company podcast. But there are a lot of people who do not want to be staring at their own face when they open Apple Podcasts. And so they go with a typographic or graphic art, and that's completely fine too. I would say, though, that if you have a name-branded podcast or a name-branded business, get your face on there because it's your name. It should be your face too.
Wait, you got Wayne going there. I can tell you that right now. Okay, so there's facial reactions.
When I think podcasting, my mind goes to radio. And one of the things that I find weird is we've done 250 podcasts, and I don't know what my listener looks like. And I think you heard something. It's actually your guest, not your listener. Stop it. But how do you dive in or mine getting inside the head of a listener?
Depending on which podcast host you use, you can get different levels of data about their demographics. Some hosts will let you know things like gender, income, location in the world, maybe even professional industry. Those tend to be the more expensive ones. A really good way is the hard work way of doing things. Open up your calendar and talk to some listeners. Find some people, put out a call in your email and your socials. Says, hey, we would like to learn about the people who are listening to this show. We would like to connect with you directly. Please book some time for a coffee chat with us. We'll buy you a coffee, send them a Starbucks gift card or something, and just spend some time chatting. That's something I do recommend really strongly, especially if there's something that you feel is not working the way it should be. If your show is growing, if you're happy with your numbers, and if you're getting great engagement, you're winning at podcasting. Amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're not happy with one of those elements, then you got to look at your variables. Is it the people that you're talking to? Is it the format of the show? Is it your art? Is it your calls to action? Is it your editing? You want to isolate those different variables and start testing them. Getting insight from the people who are listening or who are your key audience, they can tell you which variables to start with or which are going to be the most likely to make the bigger impact. And that'll save you some time.
If you launched a podcast, like we have the Knack for Business one, but all of a sudden we decided to do a unique bundle for a specific area because our audience is pretty wide spectrum. You're in business, you want to start a business and so forth. But let's say we wanted to drill down into a niche, CRMs or podcast editing or coaching for the person that's a plumber, electrician, a tradesperson that's looking, how do I scale myself out of my business? Because that way I get some money and that's my golden nest egg. How do I make that happen? Not be that coach to help that person do that. You attribute it like there's some car manufacturers, you have the brand name, and then you have a division of that brand name showing up. Do you build it up that way, or do you build it out as a separate entity and then you push it out? How would you craft it? And I know that I've left that pretty broad. I didn't give you enough kind of finite details, but how do I do that business development piece to get that push out?
We've got a couple of options. Before buying a new domain name and getting new cover art designed, I would probably do a special series on your existing RSS feed with maybe 6 or 10 episodes focusing on this particular niche and be clear to your audience, this is what we're doing for the next 10 weeks. If it's your thing, amazing. If it's not, we're going to be back in August with our regularly scheduled programming. If it performs well, then you've got a solid business case that a secondary podcast could perform well. If it doesn't perform well, you run an experiment, you learn some things, you move on. When you end up having a whole bunch of different kind of subsidiary podcasts, then, in my opinion, you're talking network and interrelated shows. You've got maybe your prime podcast and related shows underneath. And then there are decisions to make about whether you want everything to be on the prime feed or separate feeds. But I would start thinking that having different related brands under your umbrella podcast is typically the way to go. Again, I've developed podcast networks for people, so I might be a little biased about that, but there's just so much fun. It's fun. So if you do really want to talk about these really different things from different audiences, but it's your company, your brand, having multiple shows that can cross-promote and interrelate with each other can be a really powerful business tool.
I'm going to take a risk here. This is the bartender that doesn't drink question.
Okay.
Megan is driving half an hour somewhere in Quebec. Is she listening to a podcast? And if so, what is the technology? Is it through a car radio? Tell me what you listen to as a listener when you have everything in front of you.
Let's see. So while I'm driving, I have a very old car with a very old sound system, so I listen to CDs. I listen to podcasts when I'm cooking, cleaning and doing house chores, gardening, things like that. So that's what I listen to. I use currently AntennaPod. I'm not over Google Podcasts going away. It was my favorite app. I am so crushed that it's gone, but that is the way of things. So AntennaPod is doing a pretty good job for me. And I listen to a lot of podcasts for work, of course. I don't tend to listen to a lot of business podcasts for fun because I listen to a lot of them. I love the history ones. I love the food shows. So it's usually from my phone through AntennaPod, and I'm usually wearing my earbuds.
An advertising perspective, if you don't have the number of downloads, but the ones that you do have are high quality, right? Or you just have the downloads. And there are some podcasters out there that have contentious issues that they talk about. They revel in or playing with fire, and they kind of get slammed. The question is, how do you figure out the advertising element in that space? How much should you charge? How much should you put in? How long a ditty should you put in the middle of it? Do you do it in the midsection or raft of the podcast? Or do you just attribute it to a tag as an aside as the podcast goes out?
Big topic, podcast advertising and sponsorships.
Sorry, is that a whole new podcast? Are you talking
for a second conversation? But no, a couple of different ways to look at monetizing your podcast directly through advertisements and sponsorships. There's marketplace style advertising where you're going to have a pause in your audio. You're going to drop in an ad marker and a marketplace is going to bid on that spot. And that's going to give you a little bit less control over what this specific ad is, although you do have some controls around that. And you're going to pay a market rate, which is a CPM or cost per mil or a dollar amount per 1,000 downloads, typically $25 to $35 depending on your niche. This is great if you're getting hundreds of thousands of downloads a month. You can make tons of money. If you are not at that level, you're going to want to look more towards what we call sweetheart deals. And that's looking at people that you know, companies that you have relationship with, or companies that you know are really well matched with the niche that you have. You're going to reach out to them directly and say, hey, I've got this really well targeted list. It's not big, but they're your buyers. And you can say, I will do a personal host read ad, which is much higher value and it's going to be taken much more seriously by your audience for your company. I'm going to link to you in all of our show notes. I'm even going to send a dedicated email for the month that you're a sponsor, and that's going to cost $1,500. And you can negotiate deals like that privately and then do the work manually rather than dropping in the tag and using the marketplace system, which tends to be a lot better, especially for smaller or newer shows. It takes more work and you got to have those professional relationships to get things going, but it can be a way to supplement the costs of production and later even turn it into a real income source.
I can hear Bernie wincing about the amount of stuff I'm going to be whining about that you brought up. I'm excited about that.
I love having this impact on people.
I can just sit here and nod and go, it's almost like I'm talking to my spouse, except when he's not my spouse.
I agree that if you do a podcast, you're a podcaster. If you're building a brand, it takes a while to build a brand. If you were going to guess how many sessions in, whether it's weeks or months, how many sessions in would you say you gave it a good shot, you've checked out the audience, and you didn't quit too soon, but look at your metrics?
Yep. I'd say after a year is a good first touch point. That's if you set out with the intent of creating an ongoing podcast with a regular release cadence. You want to give it at least a year. I'd even maybe go to 18 months because it can take time to build traction. But I'd also say sometimes it's really smart, and I recommend a lot of people start with a limited release season. And so you start with 10, 12 episodes to cover one topic or talk to a certain number of guests and see if you like it, see if it fits your business, see if your audience likes you in this context. And that can be a really nice way to test the waters without pod fading. But if you are setting out to do an ongoing show, I'd commit to at least a year before you decide whether it succeeded or failed. And at the beginning of that year, you've got to decide what success or failure looks like and what you're willing to invest to get there. So you can't just at the end of the year say, okay, we tried a bunch of stuff, but I had no goals and I tracked nothing. Did I succeed? Who knows? But if you start at the beginning of that year and you say, okay, I want to release every single week. I want to get at least like 20 new business friends. And I want at least 250 people to be listening to every episode by the end of the year. Cool. Now you've got targets. You can check in each quarter and see how you're doing and make adjustments. And at the end, you can decide, okay, we hit our goals, but I hated it. Or we hit our goals and I loved it, or we spent too much money. You'll have all of this information to make a good decision for your business.
You came up with a term that I both got instantly, but I want you to unpack. Pod fading.
Pod fading is when you start a podcast and it's really exciting. It's a whole new thing. It's going to do so many great things for your business. It's going to be great. You get your first guests. You've got your art. It's amazing. And then you record an episode. I know this is good, but now there's a lot of work to do. And then all of a sudden you've got to do another one next week. And no one is listening. Why is nobody listening to this? They won't even click the link in the email. What's going on? And so after 7 episodes, you're just like, I'm not doing it anymore. And your podcast quietly fades into the silence and is never heard of again. That is pod fading. It happens to a lot of podcasts because podcasting is hard, a lot of work, and it can be expensive. So it's understandable when it happens. It's best avoided if possible.
The sunset clause. AI voices, intros and extras. What's your opinion on that? And I'll tell you my reasoning on this. The reasoning is that I'm looking for something, a sound bite that's going to be different. And even when I have a male guest, I'll use a female voice. When I have a female guest, I'll use a male voice. So what I'm trying to do is provide a difference in the moments. But you're saying AI voices are no, or even AI in the whole podcast.
One of the best things about podcasts, what listeners tend to like most, is the human connection they develop with the host. If your first impression is a robot, that's now the first impression that you've made, is that this is not real. It is not genuine. This is a robot probably talking to other robots. It's part of the dead internet theory, right? The whole internet's just going to become bots talking to other bots. I don't think that has a place in podcasts. There will be people who disagree with me, but it's your podcast, your business, your brand. Say hello to the audience yourself. They're here to hear you. When a podcast that has been doing guest interviews pretty consistently for a long time, when all of a sudden they do a solo episode, 99 times out of 100, that episode is going to outperform their guest interviews because people want that time with the host. I think opening up a show with an AI voice or even total AI podcast hosts that are now interviewing actual humans, existentially horrified by the idea. And I think not just as a producer, but as someone who I listen to podcasts to hear people, to have human connection with people. And so I think that AI really takes away from that. It's not that AI has no place in podcasting. There are AI tools that can bring me up a couple of notches so it doesn't sound so weird to listen to. That's a great use of AI. AI editors, in my opinion, they're not there yet. It's choppy. The mixing is off. The sound balance is a little wonky. That will change in the next couple of years. It will become as good as human editors. But I think we're not there yet. And I think there is a real place to prioritize the human connection that you're making in podcasting. I don't think AI voices contribute to that. Another soapbox, I apologize.
No,
You'd ask the question.
I like putting my foot on the middle and going, well, that's stuck to the foot. But it's okay. It tells me a bit more. I'm going to let the next question go away. Maybe you'll find a trigger question.
What are the key points for a podcaster to share with an audience, whoever that audience is?
Like the key points within it. That is a little bit broad because the goals of different podcasts are going to be so different. We could maybe talk about the anatomy of a podcast episode. That's usually going to have the intro and the outro, often is produced with music or has a voiceover, human or otherwise. And sometimes that is preceded by a hook, which is a clip from the audio that teases interest in what is to come. So we've got sizzle clip, produced intro, outro. Then you've got your host welcome, where the host opens up and says, hey, this is who I am. This is who you are. If you're listening, welcome. Here's what we're doing. Then it's your body content. And that's where you can get wild and do absolutely anything. At some point, you might have a mid-roll ad or sponsor thanks. Then you're going to have your soft CTA, which is where you'll say, this was amazing. Here's where you catch with the guest and make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter so you never miss an episode. And then probably go into your produced outro, which is going to have your music again and maybe direct people to subscribe on their favorite platform or share. And that's your basic template for a podcast episode.
Thank you. I have a question that's more interesting to me. I am optimistic to the point of delusional.
Fun way to live life.
It can be, but I suggest medication. But I dream about the podcast outgrowing me. You have either in your network a person who got so good at podcasting and had so much fun, he either sold his business, put it on a setting, and became focused as a podcaster.
I do. One of good buddies of mine, we used to produce for him one of his shows directly, and he loved podcasting. So we started another show and then another show. And then he had 3 shows, and this is in the compliance legal space. Then he's, I need other podcasts. I'm going to start a network. And so we helped him develop the network a little bit. And now there's over 70 shows on this network. They get over 2 million downloads a month. And he calls himself a recovering lawyer, but now he's a full-time podcast network manager.
That's a good line.
Yeah, he really has turned it into an amazing, thriving business that has many properties and great sponsorships. He's a leader in the space. Tom Fox, Compliance Podcast Network. Go look him up. He's wonderful.
Megan, this has been a really spectacular conversation. I'm going to rebook you again for another podcast. If you're
Okay.
willing, for our listeners, how do they find you and what areas do you serve? You just serve the province at Quebec, or do you service nationally, or do you service the continent of North America, or are you global? What's the scoop and how do we get a hold of you?
We currently work internationally, but typically we work in North America. So Canadian and American podcasters, and typically smaller businesses, often who have been podcasting in-house or who are pod curious and thinking about podcasting for the first time. We can help you get a show off the ground or take all of that podcast work off your desk. And we are now, as we mentioned, moving to network development. If you have a great audience related in theme like marketing, PR, publishing, we can help you build a whole network of podcasts under your brand to create a new platform for yourself. You can find us at onestonecreative.net or podcastingforbusiness.com, especially if you want a copy of that book, which I do recommend.
Megan Dougherty, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. I hope you enjoyed this session because I did. I know Wayne did. He's grinning ear to ear right now. And if you're in the podcast space, you're looking to put your toes in the water or on the airwaves, so to speak, reach out to Megan.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, Wayne@motivateuca. That is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website motivateuca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Javan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.